Thad Beaumont finally decides to kill his pseudonym, but it looks like his pseudonym, named George Stark, doesn't want to be dead. Why? Let's read The Dark Half and find out. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I will be reviewing The Dark Half by Stephen King. So guys, we're finally here. Not only is this the last Stephen King book that I'll be reviewing for the Richard Bachman novels, as we will discuss why in a moment, but it is also the last book I will be reviewing of the year. What an incredible year here on YouTube, and I'm going to talk about that later on in a separate video. But yeah, anyway, so The Dark Half, in case you don't know, it was written by Stephen King, published in 1989, and it basically follows a writer named Thad Beaumont who decides to kill off his pseudonym, but the pseudonym doesn't want to stay dead and starts wreaking havoc trying to stay alive. So that is a very interesting premise, and of course, Stephen King also had a pseudonym kind of like this, named Richard Bachman, with, of course, all the Bachman books I've reviewed. But, I mean, luckily Richard Bachman didn't, do the stuff that George Stark does in this. George Stark is the pseudonym, by the way. But, anyway, yeah. So, Stephen King kind of wrote The Dark Half as a way to kind of, explore his feelings over having a pseudonym in the first place and kind of the freedom of getting to write as a different person and whatever. So, there's definitely a lot of, meta stuff going on, and I think, if I remember correctly, Stephen King even dedicates this book to Richard Bachman, so that's very interesting. But, yeah, so, the Dark Half, it's not super long, it's about 15 hours, so, that's like your Pet Cemetery, that's your Dead Zone, that's your Firestarter, that's the standard Stephen King book length, even though there's The Stand and it and stuff. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, I'm just kind of rambling on. But to further explain what The Dark Half is about, let's get into the plot summary. But there will be spoilers, so you have been warned. So The Dark Half opens up with our main character, Thad Beaumont, as a child in neurosurgery. Like he's getting some brain surgery, and I'll explain why. Basically, he has this thing where he keeps hearing stuff inside his head, smelling certain smells. It's in this specific case, he keeps hearing sparrows, which are very important to the story, which I will get into in due time. But anyway, he basically has he almost dies, basically. And so he's got to get some brain surgery where doctors remove what they think is a tumor, but is actually parts of an absorbed twin, which we will get into in a second. Basically, I guess during some twin births, the stronger twin absorbs the weaker one in utero. And so, stuff like that. I'm not a doctor. I couldn't tell you all that stuff. But basically, the doctors find, part of an eye in there, some teeth, some fingernails, very gross stuff. And so, they remove the stuff and Thad is saved. And this happened in 1960. So, about 28 years later, Thad is now an adult, an author. He is married with 2 children who happen to be twins. And basically, he's also kind of a recovering alcoholic, which I will also explain why. I know there's a lot of I will explain whys, but I promise it's worth it. Anyway, basically, why he's a struggling alcoholic is, or he's a recovering alcoholic. Sorry, not a struggling alcoholic. Basically, his books that he wrote under his own name, which is Thaddeus Beaumont, aren't very successful, sorry. But the books that he writes under his pseudonym, George Stark, they're darker, edgier, more violent and stuff. They're very popular with the critics. And so Thad has 2 books to his name, and George Stark has 4 books to his name. So George Stark is very popular, while Thad isn't. Anyway, and then in order to get into the headspace of George Stark, Thad starts smoking cigarettes, he starts drinking. It's he basically changes himself to write as George Stark. Anyway, so yeah, after all that success with George Stark, someone eventually finds out that they're the same person, and then Thad's like, yeah, I think it's time to retire the pseudonym. So they set up this fake, this like mock burial in one of the neighboring towns of Castle Rock. And so like that said and done, it got an article in People magazine. Sorry if I'm sounding confused. I'm really not. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, so there was like a photographer, an editor, an agent that all were involved with kind of like this thing. And so as far as Thad and his wife Liz know, that's kind of the end of George Stark. Time to move on with a new chapter of their lives. But little do they know that George Stark is actually not only a real thing, but he's also alive and out to not be dead. Basically, what he does is he hunts down all the people who were kind of responsible for his exposure. So, like the photographer who took the picture, the guy who originally, ousted him in the first place, Thad's editor and literary agent, them too. So basically, like, he's just going on a murder rampage, and at every scene of the crime, Thad's fingerprint and voice are found at the crime scene with a message saying, "The sparrows are flying again," which again will be important later. And so Castle Rock Sheriff Alan Pangborn, he kind of has all the evidence against Thad in the world. And so he goes to talk to Thad about it. Not only does Thad refuse to answer his questions, but he also has alibis. So it's like Thad, he seems like he didn't do it, but since, the fingerprints and voice like match exactly, all that stuff. So basically this book is one long investigation. Thad reveals that twins kind of share some things, like they either feel each other's pain or can transfer thoughts or something, and that's like an actual thing that twins can do. And then at the same time, he starts to get nightmares about this George Stark guy doing stuff. And so Alan Pangborn is also doing his own research. Like, he gets in contact with the doctor who performed the brain surgery on Thad all those years ago. And the doctor basically tells him, what I already told you is that Thad had an unborn twin that was absorbed and was found in the brain, and that they removed him and stuff. And so Alan is basically like, okay, so Richard Stark is like a whole other person. Because that's what George Stark is. Thad's twin, in a sense. Anyway, long story short, the book happens. George Stark manages to track down Liz and the kids, forces them to go to Castle Rock because they live in Ludlow, Maine, which is where Pet Cemetery took place, by the way. So anyway, they go to Ludlow, and then Alan follows them there, so he kind of gets captured by George Stark as well. And now they're waiting for Thad to show up, so that basically George Stark's plan is that he wants Thad to write another George Stark novel so that he won't be dead anymore. And so basically Thad goes over to the house, he starts to write some stuff, and then there's a giant fight. Alan is trying to get Liz and the children out, and then Thad is, facing off with George Stark. And then the sparrows, which I've been mentioning around the whole story, turns out they're kind of like, I guess, a warning to Thad or something. And what they do is they swoop into the house, not only tear it down, but they basically eat George Stark alive and leave only remains and stuff. Which is, terrifying. He basically gets eaten alive by like thousands of sparrows, which is horrifying. Anyway, so long story short, George Stark dies, the house is very destroyed, and Thad and Alan decide to stay behind and burn the house, destroy the evidence, make it look like someone just like drove their car in there and then everything just exploded. But it also is revealed that Liz is kind of worried about her future with Thad because part of him hated George Stark, but part of him also loved George Stark and liked him. But that is how The Dark Half ends. So overall, what did I think about The Dark Half? Well, I thought The Dark Half was a very interesting book about, like dual personality, pseudonyms, so kind of like the Jekyll and Hyde stuff based on that thing that I reviewed many months ago, if you remember that review. So it kind of reminds me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in a way, but also brings up a lot of stuff about twins and like psychological stuff and like the effects of whatever. I don't really know what I'm saying, but these are just kind of things that I thought about. It's like, it's a very interesting book. And on one hand, I think it's the perfect length, and on the other hand, I don't think it's the perfect length. Like, it's either too short to explain this stuff or it's too long to explain this stuff. The standard Stephen King thing. It's typically either too long or too short. So anyway, I don't know. I like the length. I think it could have been a little shorter though, maybe by about 50 or 60 pages. Certainly not something like 150 pages. I think maybe about 50 or 60 pages could have been cut, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But yeah, like I said, I overall really enjoyed the book. It was certainly fun revisiting Castle Rock after so long. In fact, the last book that I did for 2024, last year, was Needful Things, which was the finale to the Castle Rock stories, and The Dark Half was like the direct prequel, or Needful Things was the direct sequel to The Dark Half. So I kind of liked that in that video, since I said I missed some stuff from The Dark Half, I now have caught up on that stuff. So that was very interesting as well. And yeah, I mean, yeah, as I said, Thad Beaumont is certainly a very interesting character, as are all Stephen King's characters. And I love seeing Alan Pangborn again. Alan Pangborn is becoming one of my favorite characters of Stephen King, because Alan Pangborn not only has a lot of appearances, but he seems to know what he's talking about. And George Stark. Oh man, George Stark is just one of the creepiest villains out there. It's like he threatens people, he lies to people, he's not afraid to do whatever he wants to get what he wants. It's like he's a very dark and manipulative character, and I just love when Stephen King writes villains like that. It's like Charlie Decker was one. Kurt Barlow, I guess, was kind of one as well. It's like there's a lot of examples of villains that are like that, and George Stark is no exception. George Stark, I think, is actually an underrated villain because I never really see him get talked about. But George Stark was just such an interesting villain to Thad's main characterness. Perfect protagonist, perfect antagonist, all that kind of stuff. And the way they go at it is just so interesting and all of that. And yeah, I just really enjoyed all the stuff that they did together. Their rivalry is just so interesting, and I would love to see so much more of that in the future. But yeah, so anyway, in conclusion, please go read The Dark Half. You will not regret it. But that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed my review for The Dark Half by Stephen King. As I said, it is just a wonderful book about like rivalries and duality and all that kind of thing. So I certainly enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed as well as much as I did. But anyway, yeah, that is the end of the video. Please make sure to comment about either The Dark Half or books in general. You guys get the gist at this point. You've seen my outros. But yeah, anyway, yeah, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 400 subscribers, so please help me reach that. And yeah, like I said, this was the last book of the year, and yeah, what a way to end the year, right? But yeah, anyway, I guess I'm just going on. But yeah, as I said, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below if you have not already. That's the end of the video. I've been Mr. BG. This has been BG's Books, and who are you?
And you. Or your darker half, anyway.
Uh-oh.
That's what you get for killing me, you jerk.